Strange Shadows, a Clark Ashton Smith podcast.
This world, said Volmar, plainly belongs to the Mercurian type. One side is always presented to the sun, the other confronts eternal night, though it may be that there is a very slow and incomplete diurnal rotation. One hemisphere, as we have seen, is a blazing desert. The other is sheeted in ice and frozen snow, except for the twilight zone in which we have landed.
Greetings, folks, and welcome to Season 2, Episode 12 of Strange Shadows, the Clark Ashton Smith podcast. The voice you just heard was Shelley D. Cruz reading the opening paragraph of today's story. I'm one of your hosts, Tim Mendes.
And I'm the other one, Rob Hoyton. And I think before we get into today's episode, we just both want to say a big thanks to everyone who came to the Innsmouth Literary Festival, which was a couple of weeks ago now, I guess, isn't it?
Yes. Yeah. Still seems like yesterday, but yeah.
Yeah, it does. We had a really great day, and I hope everyone enjoyed it. Certainly all the feedback has been very good. And we want to say a big thanks to all our guests and to Ramsey Campbell, of course, all our traders. And we had some people come quite a distance as well, didn't we?
Indeed, yeah. We had a couple from the States, Chris Carr and Heather Poirier.
Yes, yeah. It was great to see them both, especially Chris. Been a big friend to this and the Innsmouth Book Club for so long.
Yeah, and we had Ulrich Devetta, who people will have heard because I think he's done some comments that we've read out over the time doing Strange Shadows. So yes. Yeah, he came over from Belgium.
Yeah, and to see some of our patrons as well, including Gary Pennington was there. So it was nice to meet some people and put faces to names. So
indeed, yeah. I had that moment a few times, like people going, "Hi," talking at me like they know me, sort of thing. It's like, "Oh, I'm blah blah blah." On the
right. Yeah, it was really nice, and we do apologise to anyone if we did seem a bit abrupt today. We were both highly stressed, and as you can imagine, the organisation was something. So we also want to give a huge thanks to Shelley de Cruz and to Heather and Rob and to Stephen Graham for running the games room as well.
Indeed.
And the news is, as we speak, we're actually next week going to look at another venue for next year. And believe me, if this venue comes off, it's going to blow your socks off. It really is something special.
It really is.
Okay, so shall we get on to our story today? A Captivity in Serpens. And we're back in space with the good Captain Volmar.
Yeah, as I like to think of it, the adventures of Captain Douchebag. Yeah. and his friend in tweed. Yeah,
his friend in tweed. I was glad to see that Roverton is back in his.
Yeah, I like Roverton. He should be the hero.
He's my favourite character. Definitely.
Yeah. Not Volmar. It should be Roverton.
Let's start off with our favourite words, shall we?
Yeah, for the first one that I'm going to go with is a word that it's one of those that you instantly know what it is, but I don't think I've ever seen it before because it's quite an archaic term. It's spraddling, which is to walk with a sprawling gait, similar to ducklings. Or I thought when I read the description, John Wayne when he's just got off his horse.
You know? John Wayne is big leggy.
Yeah, it's that walk, that sort of, you know what I mean. Yeah, that's spraddling, a spraddling walk.
There was a few botanical words in here, and one was aerophytes, which is a plant that derives moisture from air rather than from the soil, and they quite frequently live on other plants, but not in a parasitic way. They just draw moisture directly from the air.
Yeah. So they're like those anemones that live on the back of crabs, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
Right, yeah. For my next one, it's actually a French word. It's bouleversement. I think that's it. But it basically means upheaval. Yeah, which I thought it's a nice word, isn't it? Bouleversement.
Yes. I had to look that one up, as I must confess.
Yeah.
There were a couple that I just liked the sound of that I knew or we'd covered before, and one of those was nacreous. Which is like the luster of pearl. That's such a lovely word.
Yeah, I had one that I didn't actually know, which was it's relating to starch, means containing starch. It's farinaceous,
Ah, oh, that's a nice sounding word, isn't it?
isn't it? Yeah.
Yes. And sticking with our botanical or, well, biological theme, we also had annelids, which I had to look up. Segmented worms. I
Indeed.
never knew that.
Yeah. Yeah. My final one is it basically is another word for haggling or bartering. It's chaffering.
Chaffering, that's nice.
So you can imagine. You imagine. I went down Withenshaw Market Saturday and I was chaffering with this bloke.
It puts me in mind of the sort of the dawn chorus of birds. You know, I pulled back the curtains and opened the window and heard the lovely sound of chaffering.
Yeah, a chaffering of chaffinches.
Chaffering of chaff. Yeah,
There you go.
Yeah, very nice. And I'll go for my last one. Again, it's a word that we've heard before, so we know what it is, but I just like the sound of it. Rubescent.
Ooh, that is a good one, isn't it?
Red, ruddy, blushing. Yes.
Nice.
So, those are our words. What's the publication history?
Right. Well, Captivity in Serpens was completed in March 1931. Smith had already started writing another story featuring Captain Douchebag. But after Red World of Polaris was rejected by David Lasser from Wonder Stories, Lasser sent Smith a letter outlining the magazine's editorial requirements. Right? As you would imagine, this annoyed Smith somewhat. The letter from Lasser sadly no longer exists, but Smith had moaned about it to H.P. Lovecraft and also to August Derleth. Now, two letters are pretty much identical in what they contain, and some of the quotes from the original letter are the same. The content is pretty much the same, but the version that he sent to Derleth has added vitriol, and I find it really interesting because it's something I've talked about before. Is the sort of the interaction between Lovecraft and Smith was more playful, whereas Derleth and Smith, they liked to tear things apart a lot. Like they would sit and critique. It's like it's the different friendships where, you know, everybody has that friend they like to go down the pub and put the world to rights with, right? You go sit and have a pint and have a good moan, you know, and that's the sort of relationship that Derleth and Smith seem to have. But anyway, it's a letter dated November the 11th, 1930. I've just completed my 35th yarn, a science-fictional horror, and I'm now beginning an interplanetary adventure tale for submission to Wonder Stories. The editor of this magazine has no idea whatever of literary values and is cramping me so abominably with his requirements that I fear there is little chance of putting over any really good work. Action is requisite, and a play of human motives, that's in quotes, with alien worlds used only as a background. Porca Madonna. Why go to a foreign planet if that's all they want? What I'd like to do along those lines is some imaginative realism, and one could hardly make the thing sufficiently non-human in achieving that. There's not one chance in a quintillion that the life on other worlds is all like ours, and any man or men precipitated in such a milieu would have a desperate struggle to survive, to retain health and sanity amid the play of forces which, because alien would be inevitably hostile, survival is hard enough in our own evolutionary milieu. Figure what it would be in a world of Algol or Polaris. I'm afraid the background would obtrude itself in a manner that would never do for stellar Wild West stories.
Very, very interesting. Very interesting. There's a few points there that we've touched on before, and perhaps we can we can talk about, I'm sure.
Yeah, I thought it was a really interesting letter, and you can always see him sort of gritting his teeth as he's writing it.
Yeah.
You can tell he's not a happy camper there, can't you?
Definitely. Yeah.
And so after receiving this, Smith started work on A Captivity in Serpens, vowing to H.P. Lovecraft that if they want action, I'll give them action.
Well, he certainly did, to be fair.
Yeah. And Lasser loved it. And it was the cover story for the summer 1931 issue of Wonder Stories Quarterly. but it was published under the name The Amazing Planet.
Oh, that's very 50s sci-fi, isn't it?
Isn't it? But again, to which he remarked to August Derleth, God knows why.
Oh, brilliant.
Yeah. So there you go. And 17,000 words, Captivity in Serpens is Clark Ashton Smith's longest work.
Wow.
Yeah, there you go.
It's a shame that his longest work would be one of these rather than the Hyperborea or Zothique, isn't it? But we can get into that as we go along, no doubt. Not that it's a bad story, but
no, it's like I've mentioned to you before it came on. I think it's probably my favourite of the Volmar stories.
Yeah.
I don't know. I think it's Roverton saves it for me.
I think he comes out as the hero, to be honest.
He does. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
But there was a couple of points in that letter that I thought were very interesting. We've spoken about this action idea before, and both Lovecraft and Smith kicked back against that where they could. Lovecraft probably more so. But this idea that we've said before about Smith's aliens being like alien.
Yeah.
You know. It's not. I don't want to be down on Star Wars, but it's not Chewbacca. It's not a bloke in a pedal bin.
Yeah, exactly.
Technically, that's a robot. Before anyone writes in, I suppose Jabba the Hutt is the closest you get to something Lovecraftian in inverted commas.
Yeah, well, but the big toothy mouth thing in the desert that Jabba feeds things to.
Oh yeah.
I mean, that's like straight out of Brian Lumley, right?
Absolutely, yeah. Yeah. And also that idea that then ties in with that is it sounds like he says they want, well, in a sense, isn't this what Star Trek was wagon trail in space? I mean, that was the words literally used, I think, at one point.
Yeah.
And it's as much a sort of soap opera, in a sense, in space, as much as anything else, because pretty much everything they deal with is human-ish.
Yeah, it's interesting because he mentions that whole Wild West thing in the letter to Lovecraft as well. Basically the same thing, that what they want is effectively space westerns.
Yeah.
And if you look back at the history of this kind of adventure sci-fi, that's precisely what it is. And you're right, with Star Wars, it's like the first thing, it's the Mandalorian, right? They really leaned into that.
Oh, the spaghetti thing. Yeah,
it's a spaghetti western. Yeah. It's basically fistful of dollars in space.
And I enjoyed it. I really
thought it was really good.
Yeah.
I liked it because I'm a big fan of spaghetti westerns.
Yeah.
But so, yeah.
And the only one that strikes me in Star Trek where you had that issue of something being so alien it was sanity blasting was what was the name of it? Was it the Medusa with the alien ambassador in a box, and Spock opens the box and he's supposed to have the goggles on, but he forgets to put the goggles on and it drives him mad. I'm sure a listener will tell us which episode. Was it the Medusa effect? Perhaps I can't remember.
Possibly, yeah, I can't remember.
I mean, to be fair, there were some other more alien-looking aliens in it. The creature in the mines and that kind of stuff. That was a bit Shoggoth-y, wasn't it?
It's a little bit, yeah. I always thought Doctor Who did well in that, especially the 60s and 70s stuff.
That's true, yeah.
They're big protoplasmic blobs and, you know, all these weird and wonderful things, especially like the really early stuff, the William Hartnell stuff. There were some incredibly bizarre creatures in that. But, you know, because again, the whole point of that was they didn't want it to look like a man in a suit.
Yeah, it was a conscious effort to make it
so it looked like somebody wrapped in bubble wrap instead.
So there's a whole potential episode there of aliens, the portrayal of aliens in film and literature. Perhaps that's an IBC special at some time.
That'd be a good one for the IBC, yeah.
Yeah, maybe we'll do a sort of tie-in with here as well. But then that whole question comes to how you present the story, because as he said, you don't get this human dynamic. Yeah. Like, let's say you've got some sort of conflict between the captain and his second in command. That pales into insignificance when there's a Shoggoth the size of, you know, a small continent that you're looking down on as it devours the rest of the planet.
Exactly.
It kind of puts things in a different perspective, doesn't it, really? Yeah.
Well, it just speaks, it's the whole cosmic horror thing of the insignificance of humanity in the face of these things, isn't it? So I can totally see his frustrations, you know. So it's almost like he's having his sort of artistic vision being stifled
Oh,
to a
totally.
degree.
I think, yeah.
But you know,
And it's not like you can't have character within that, because
no,
the
absolutely.
Testament of Athaeus, like we read last time, you very much get the character of the executioner, yet you've got this really weird thing going on, this creature that it develops into a formless spawn, you know.
Yeah. Well, Sir Tempera Zeros is a great example. He's a great character. He's a brilliant character. He's your classic rogue, isn't he? He's like the sort of prototype for a lot of these rogue characters you now see in historical fiction and fantasy. You know, they've always got the rogue thief and, you know, his drunk mate. There's always that double act, isn't there? And there you go. Yeah. Smith did it in that story right back then, you know.
And I think it manifests in this story. I made a note that a lot of the dialogue sounds quite stilted. You know, we'll get to that as we go through, I'm sure. But it's my gosh,
his chaps in space
and that kind of thing. Yeah. Oh, that was a close call, by Jove, sort of thing, isn't it? It doesn't really ring true. But anyway, that set aside, there's still some lovely writing in here, of course, and lots of wonderful Smithian colours.
Yes.
So we're back with Captain Volmar on the ether ship Alcyone, and I like this little mention again on their half decade of journeying, which still to me is the 5-year mission.
Yes.
To explore strange new worlds.
Yeah, the first thing I thought about this, because obviously, like the first one, Arthur Crew got killed, and they've been on this thing. The numbers must be dwindling on this ship now, right? Then there can't be many of them left. So I always thought about that about Star Trek as well. They're on a 5-year mission, and all the red shirts keep getting blasted. Where do they keep getting? It's not like they can just pull up at the job centre.
That's a good point. I wonder if someone somewhere must have done how many people get killed in Star Trek.
Oh, they must have done
the original series. And what was the crew? It was 440 or something like that, wasn't it? So yeah, did they stop off at star bases? I mean, they're at a star base in Tribbles, aren't they? The Trouble with Tribbles.
Yeah, but
I don't think that wasn't like a Starfleet star base, was it?
There's
something else our listeners can help us with. How many people die? How many crew people die in Star Trek, the original series?
Brilliant.
You could say anything. We have no way of checking. This caught my eye as well. So, yeah, everyone's getting a little bit twitchy, right? They're all getting a little bit of cabin fever. They've been on this 5-year mission. Even the ascetically ardent Volmar, because as we know with this guy, he's almost like the sort of scientist version of a religious fanatic, isn't he?
Yeah, he's really got that sort of monomania thing going on, hasn't he? It's like the mission and nothing else, you know. And
they come into the constellation Serpens. Serpent without a T. At first I did wonder if that was a misprint. But the constellation is called Serpens. In Greek myth, it represents the serpent held by Asclepius, who was a healer, and everyone will have seen that on the rod or staff of Asclepius, which is used in the medical profession, right?
Yes.
And again, that was something that always puzzled me. Why do you have a snake as a symbol of medicine and healing? It doesn't seem quite right.
Yeah, I actually went down that rabbit hole a while ago because I thought exactly the same thing. Why is there a snake on it? So I googled it.
But the snake was a symbol of rebirth in ancient Greece, and the Asclepius cult used snakes as part of their medicine. I guess they used some of the venom or something like that for medicinal purposes in various ways. And certainly you could see people wanting to mix up some brew to put them in an altered state of consciousness. Serpent venom seems like a thing you might be using, right? Like toad venom and that sort of stuff.
Yeah. Well, there's actually I think it's a wine. I think you can get like snake wine out in Vietnam that has some of the venom in it, and apparently it numbs your lips and everything, and it makes you all There is something it's on my bucket list. I want to try it.
Well, make a change from snake bite, I suppose.
Yeah, exactly.
Stereotypical goth drink.
Exactly.
Yeah, so Serpens is a constellation in the northern hemisphere, and one remarkable thing about it is that it's split into 2 regions. It's a 2-part constellation. It has the equivalent in Chinese mythology or Chinese astronomy, but they describe it as a marketplace surrounded by a stone wall. So quite a different interpretation.
All right. Yeah.
Nothing to do with serpents at all.
Yeah.
But they come into this system, and that's where they see a planet they think they can land on. So time for the crew to stretch their legs, basically. But this planet is quite unusual, isn't it?
It is. Yeah, it's ice fields and mountains that glimmered palely on the nightward side between two diminutive moons, one of which is gibbous, which I thought was a nice touch.
Hooray!
Yes, clouds and vapours, and the surface is covered in this kind of fungus, isn't it? It's all kind of fungoid, it's described as.
Yeah, it's so it's just this planet. It doesn't revolve at all. It seems to be the case. You've got the one side towards the sun and one side away from it, with this sort of belt of vegetation around the middle. And I don't know how scientifically possible this is. If a planet doesn't spin, will it not have gravity? Now we're calling on my powers of physics here, which are diminutive in the extreme.
Yeah, that's mine too.
That's another task for our listeners. We're giving you a lot of homework today, listeners.
Yeah, and this vegetation, it's not covered with anything like least related to grass, but a peculiar growth 2 or 3 inches high, like a thin branching fungus. And it's not rooted in the soil and fell over or crumbed readily beneath the footsteps of the explorers. So very, very strange. It also brings to mind some of like Hope Hodgson's stuff, because he loved this fungus, right?
Oh, yeah. So they land and they're treading across this, I almost get the impression of like crusty sort of vegetation almost. It's like you say, it's crumbling beneath their feet. And I thought this was nice. We find this forest. Well, it's described as a full-grown forest of trees, heavy at the base with dwindling boles like inverted carrots, and many nodular outbranchings of an irregularity more grotesque than that of any terrene cacti. The lower branches appear to touch the ground with the ungainly sprawl of crab or tarantula legs. Creepy forest, eh?
I love it. Yeah, I thought that was a really good simile there. The crab or tarantula legs. You know, you're getting there spindly.
You can really visualise that, can't you?
You can. Yeah.
It put me in mind of those trees you get in the mangrove swamps, those huge twisted roots, that kind of thing.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. I was just trying to think, because you see these things when you go to these stately homes and you've got like an arboretum, but they've got all these like weird and wonderful plants and trees and stuff that basically Victorians have gone and stolen.
Just pick something, yeah, as they did, yeah. And they're a little bit puzzled by these. They're not sure what they are, so they do what any good scientist would do. Well, Volmar at least, he kicks one over. Just like incredible, isn't it? Here's an alien life form. Let's kick it over and see what happens.
But again, it just brings to mind the Victorians. That's why I can't help seeing these guys in pith helmets, like spacesuits with pith helmets and tweed, because it is that sort of Victorian mentality. Go over there and
just kick
boot
it,
or,
with the pipe inside the helmet kind of thing.
Yeah,
a little vent that lets the smoke in. Yeah. But then the interesting thing when he kicks, and he just kicks a tall one over, more like a sort of shrub, I guess, or something, is it wriggles around a bit and then rights itself again, which again is quite creepy.
Yeah. And this is where you get, this is one of your air plants that you mentioned, isn't it?
Yes.
Yeah.
So is there anything in real life or our sort of biology or systems that mirrors that? We can think of Venus flytraps that move, plants that move is quite a strong science fiction trope now, isn't it? I guess after the Triffids and well, I guess even the Ents will fall into that, wouldn't they?
Yeah. My Miracle Growth, just plug my own work.
Absolutely.
Murderous Marrows, there we go.
Attack of the Murderous Marrows.
Yeah.
So they kind of observe this and talk about it a little bit and decide to continue. And now this is just Volmar and Roverton, right, on their own. They've separated for some reason from the rest of the crew. Everyone knows not to split up, right, on an alien planet. And they make a point of saying, we shouldn't wander too far, and then proceed to do exactly that.
Yes. Yeah. You get the impression that the rest of the crew were only too happy to see the back of them with Volmar, just like...
They've probably already taken off.
And they're in the ship's bar, cracking open a couple of cold ones, you know.
And these trees and shrubs grow stranger and stranger. Others grew in recumbent positions like vast vegetable centipedes or many-legged monsters. Some retracted their outer limbs in a sluggish caution before the approach of the men, but most of them did not appear to move at all. And there's no insect life, there's no animal or insect life, which is very unusual around vegetation.
Yeah, I mean, this whole description of the way they move and the fact that they're almost like insectoid themselves really does bring to mind classic 60s TV sci-fi, you know, because all of them, whether it be Doctor Who, Star Trek, Lost in Space, whatever, they always landed on a planet that was with a weird jungle, and it was all made up of like pipe cleaners and bits of vacuum cleaners and all this kind of stuff, you know. That's what I visualize it as in my head.
And at some point, someone's going to be wrestling with a big rubber tentacle.
Yeah,
It's being
absolutely
operated off screen.
Yeah.
And it's this is like your classic haunted forest stuff as well, isn't it? We mentioned Tolkien earlier, and of course that's an old fairy tale tradition.
Mm-hmm.
It's like they suddenly look up and realise that they've strayed off the path, or the vegetation has suddenly grown really thick, and things take a more sinister turn. Again,
that's a recurring thing in Smith, isn't it? Of people walking in forests and woodland and sort of crossing an invisible line, and things go, you know, they take a turn for the sinister.
Yes.
You know, it is a very recurring thing, and it's an incredibly powerful image, because I think you've all done it. Like if you've been out walking, or even if you're in a town or city, right? You take the wrong turn and you walk a bit too far and you end up in that end of town that you don't want to be in at night. You know, it's that kind of thing, isn't it?
Well, exactly the same thing. Just the other week, I was coming back, it's about 11:30 at night, and they've closed the A6 around here, one of the major roads, and you follow the diversion sign. And I go through a village, and I I end up on this track, just heading off into the night. And
nice.
I just had that sensation of, I'm going in totally the wrong direction here, you know. So I turn round, but it's always that thing of, should I go a bit further, bit further? How long before you turn around, you know?
Yeah.
It took me bloody ages to get home. But there were no walking trees. Well, at least I didn't see any, so...
Right, yeah.
And I like this, they get the impression that perhaps the trees behind are sort of closed in behind them, so it's almost like they're being herded somewhere.
So that's an incredibly unsettling thought, isn't it? You know, you turn around, it's like, sure that I passed that tree 5 minutes ago, right?
And they find some very strange footmarks, characterised by 3 toes of preternatural length and sharpness. The prints were very far apart, suggesting that their originator was possessed of phenomenally long legs. Oh, it's a big daddy long legs.
Oh, yeah. You know, a giant crane fly. Yeah. See, this is why Roverton is my hero in these stories, because his reaction to this is brilliant.
Oh, classic.
I'm not sure that I'd care to meet that customer, whatever it is. Probably it's some loathsome overgrown insect. Oh, chap.
It's so casual, isn't it?
Yeah, it's great.
And they find a large burrow, and the tracks go into this huge burrow. And of course, they could go in and have a look, but they're sensible for once, actually. They just walk straight past it, right? Eyeing it warily.
Mm.
But then things go wrong anyway, because they get past this burrow and the ground effectively opens up beneath them, and they both fall. They only fall 7 or 8 feet. If it sounds like maybe it was loose soil, or perhaps this is some sort of trap, because they fall into the burrow. So we've seen the burrow entrance. Now they're actually in the tunnel itself.
Yeah, and this is so basically they go, right, we'll head back to that entrance. But this is where they start. They're hearing a medley of shrill piping sounds.
Hey.
I know.
Piping.
It's really good.
But these aren't from inside the burrow, right?
No.
Which, by the way, also has a really a noisome, mephitic smell, and is damp with disagreeable oozings. That's a nice phrase.
Ooh.
But this shrill piping is coming from outside, and this is where we get our first glimpse of, well, we don't know if these are the natives of the planet. We presume they are, but they're certainly hunters.
The figures were bipedal, with thick legs of disproportionate shortness and arms that reached almost to the ground. The heads could not be seen from within the tunnel. These extraordinary beings were stretching a narrow, heavy-stranded net, weighted at the ends with balls of metal or mineral, which they held between them across the entrance. So yeah, it's a hunting party, and these idiots have fallen in the trap.
And you get the idea this shrill piping is to lure out whatever it is that lives in the burrow.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't really get a good glimpse of it. I thought that was a nice touch. You don't get a full glimpse of these creatures at first. They can just see some legs and some figures moving around above them. And when they do get to see them, then we get this. The heads of these beings were even more peculiar than their limbs and were quite hideous from a human standpoint. They possessed 3 eyes, 2 of which were set obliquely in close juxtaposition to a slit-like mouth surrounded with waving or drooping tentacles, and the other near the top of a long sloping brow that was lined with sparse bristles. So again, quite alien-looking aliens.
Yeah. And again, you have a great line from Roverton. Can't say that I admire the looks of those customers. What a chap.
Customers again.
Yeah. Plainly, they're a hunting party, and we, or the occupant of this burrow, or both, have been marked out as their meat.
Yes, and speaking of the occupant, this is where we get a nice horror moment. This put me in mind of Shelob's lair, right?
Isn't it?
We get the gleaming of 2 greenish phosphorescent eyes in the darkness beyond the circle of dim light that fell from the caved-in roof.
So what do? They do what any explorer worth their salt would do. They whip out their weapons.
Get the guns out. Yeah. If you can't kick it over, perhaps you can shoot it in the face.
That's a T-shirt.
Yeah, and now the thing itself comes into light, and it is quite spider-like from the sounds of it. Mm-hmm. Spraddling, there's that lovely word. Many jointed legs, a squat shaggy face and a globe-like body. Somehow it was more like an insect than an animal, like some gargantuan overnourished arachnid. So this pops out, and this is where the hunters spring into action. They chuck down spears, they chuck down nets. Volmar and Roverton open fire and turn and run.
Yeah, this goes back to what Smith was saying in that letter, doesn't it? And what we've commented on several times in these science fiction stories of Smith's, that his aliens are really, really alien.
Yeah, and bloody scary, right? You got that thing coming towards you. You shoot and run, right? But it kind of strikes me, it's a shame, because to me the power of that is in that reveal. The pale luminous eyes, the smell, the sound, and then this thing comes skittering out of the darkness.
Oh, yeah.
The action bit is kind of like, well, they shoot and run. You know, Smith is much more concerned with building up the atmosphere rather than telling you what happens, which is his strength. You know.
Oh yeah, you can see that. It's almost like 2 stories, isn't it? Because you've got the bit he's obviously invested in, which is the building of the atmosphere, the talking of the city and the fungus and the lambents of the gibbous moons and all this kind of business and the poetic language and the reveal of these horrific creatures. And then you've got obviously what this David Lasser sent him in a letter of what we want to see in it, which is we want guns, we want heroics, we want daring do.
Yeah. There's a bit of gore spilt, isn't there? Because the thing is bleeding. Basically, all 3 of them run out of the burrow and get trapped in the nets of what they're called the dwarves, aren't they? Later on, these creatures, and that takes us into chapter 2. So that the 2 men are now firmly bound in these weighted meshes, and this is where we get. I said before about the language being a bit stilted. We've already mentioned Roverton, and I guess it is a takeoff of that Victorian Edwardian gentleman explorer.
Oh, yeah.
This is a pretty tight situation, remarked Roverton, whose wit was unquenchable by any hardship or danger, no matter how desperate. Yes, and it may be tighter before we are through, added Volmar grimly. It's all very stiff upper lip, isn't it?
Again, it reminds me of 60s Doctor Who. I read it in RP. It's got that clipped BBC. It's got that clipped BBC delivery.
Where's your classic Brigadier quote, isn't it? Chappie with wings, 6 rounds, rapid fire.
Oh yeah, exactly. That's precisely it.
And we get a close-up of their captors now. We do get one unfortunate remark here, I think, which was they represented an evolutionary type similar in mental endowment to Aboriginal man,
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. Very colonial outlook again.
Yeah. Moving on. Yeah, I like the description on here because their naked, dark grey bodies were covered with a hairless skin marked off into rudimentary scales or plates, possibly denotive of some reptilian origin or affinity. And they had 3 eyes with sloping brows, tentacle-fringed mouths, giving them an indescribably weird appearance. You can say that again. I like this sort of reference to reptilian and things like that. It's very sort of saurian aspect because it almost brings to mind the lizard people again, you know?
Yes, yeah. And we do get that nice thing that we get in Lovecraft, this sort of mixture of, I'm thinking like things like the Byakhee. It's part insect, part bird, we get these strange amalgams, not in the way we have in mythology where you have a lion's body and an eagle's head and that kind of stuff. The mix is more unpalatable than that, perhaps, if we put it that way.
Yeah, because on top of that, it's got like long triple jointed arms, squat single jointed legs, and webbed feet.
Yeah, that's a real mix of evolutionary.
Yeah. So you got the insectoid, the avian, the saurian,
and the Innsmouth.
Yeah. And the Innsmouth. Yeah. Nice.
So the prisoners are prodded with spear butts to get up, and they're being led off somewhere.
Yeah, trident spears. I thought
trident spears. Yeah, that's a nice touch. Yeah, tridents are always good, right? Very gladiatorial. But I mean, a trident is a hunting spear, right?
Exactly.
You had the what they call the tiger spear in China was the 3-pronged spear. You know, because you want to pin. Sorry to be indelicate, but they want to pin the prey to the ground, so to speak.
Indeed, yeah. It's like the fishing spears and all that, the rest of it.
Yeah. And now, to be fair to Smith, we do get this, because Volmar notices that the nets and weapons are very finely made, whereas the wielders of them seem quite crude and unintelligent. And Roverton sort of says, well, that's odd, because that denotes a degree of manual skill and civilizations. And these beings are pretty low and bestial looking from a human aesthetic viewpoint. But after all, we can't tell much about them from their appearance. All the extraplanetary peoples we have met were more or less monstrous according to our standards. So, you know, at least we get that acknowledgement that, yes, we tend to judge things by how they look, but they're aliens. We have no basis for comparison.
Yeah, I thought that was a really nice touch. And the fact that Volmar agrees as well. You know,
quite
very unusual. Yeah, but to be fair, it shows that he's had some character development over these stories.
Yeah,
you know, maybe his sort of outlook is being widened to a degree.
Yeah, which you'd hope it would.
Like to think.
Yeah, 5 years in space. They say travel broadens the mind. I mean, you know. And now there was one word here that I don't recall ever seeing before in Clark Ashton Smith, and this is from Roverton. Christ. I've had enough burrows for one day, ejaculated Roverton. Can you remember seeing that before?
No.
In any of the stories we covered? That stood out to me for some reason.
I suppose it's quite unusual for the time for an American writer, you know, because I imagine a lot of the magazines would be worried about offending the deeply religious.
Yeah. I mean, certainly even the word damn would have been... you couldn't say that on the radio or whatever, could you?
Yeah, exactly. I imagine it was similar over here at that point, wasn't it? You couldn't, like, say things like that on the radio, take the Lord's name in vain and all that kind of stuff.
It wasn't until... Was it Kenneth Tynan who first said the F word on...
Yeah, Kenneth Tynan.
Was that the 60s?
Yeah.
Was it early 60s? Something like that?
Yeah, it was early 60s. It's, Kenneth Tynan. And the reason I know that is because Half Man, Half Biscuit did a song about it.
Now there's a band. I'll just say Joy Division Oven Gloves. That's one of the best songs ever.
99% of gargoyles look like Bob Todd. Dickie Davis Eyes. Oh, what a band.
Oh, what a band. What a band.
Yeah.
So they get carried off. This is, again, I said the word colonial earlier, and this is almost like one of those adventures, isn't it? You can see this in maybe not a Tarzan story so much, but that sort of thing.
Yeah.
King Solomon's Mines.
I was going to say, it's got King Solomon's Mines, that kind of thing. Even Indiana Jones, right? It's kind of that in space.
And Smith has used this before with the Amazon tribe.
Yeah.
right, where he gets captured by the Amazons, caught by the Amazons.
Carry on up the jungle. Yeah.
But then there's a surprise, because the place they get taken to is in the lee of a cliff. There's a number of stone huts, and in the middle of all that is a huge glittering object, perfectly oval in form, plainly of an artificial nature. And Roverton says, I'll wager that thing is some kind of spacecraft. So, aliens.
I like the fact that these two are starting to get a bit of banter going here, because I never bet, rejoined Volmar, but I shouldn't be surprised if you were right. He does seem to have softened somewhat in this one. He does seem to be less of a completely unrepentant tool in this one than in previous stories.
Roverton's definitely coming to the fore, isn't he?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. And this is where I made the mistake earlier, because this is where we get the second race, who are known as the dwarves.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
These are 4 foot tall with spindling limbs and delicate bodies, pinched in the centre like those of ants, and heads of such disproportionate size as to give the impression of artificial masks. They're gorgeously coloured with all the hues of the harlequin opal, and contrasted extremely with the dark giants. So you get the impression that these are perhaps the owners of the spaceship, and they're using the other ones to go out and do the hunting. So then you start getting like it's not really a predator vibe, because it's almost like they're collecting animals for experiments.
To sell them,
like a zoo or a circus somewhere. Which again, very, very Star Trek kind of.
I got Star Wars, the beginning, the Jawas. That's what they reminded me of, the Jawas, because that's what they did, wasn't it? They went around nicking droids and creatures and stuff and selling them at an auction kind of thing. And that's kind of what I got from that.
So yeah, we get more descriptions of these shorter creatures, and it does seem they're wearing some sort of mask. When they go up close, they can see the eyes are divided into many facets, like those of an insect, and blazed with emerald light. Beneath and below the eyes there was a short trumpet-like attachment, which doubtless served as a mouthpiece, and its hollow tube might well have contained the filtering apparatus surmised by Volmar. It's and again, this is something that I'm sure we've had before. They're not sure if they're wearing armour or suits, or if that's the body, or a combination of the two somehow. But it emphasises that point, doesn't it, that these are not native to this planet. They're extraterrestrial.
Yeah, and I like it because I think this sort of highlights it here, because he says the limbs and torsos of the dwarves were seemingly nude and glittered like the shards of bright-coloured beetles, which says to me that this stuff that it could be a spacesuit, but it's more like a carapace.
Yeah. And Volmar and Roverton get prodded and examined, and there's an argument going on. There's lots of discussion between these creatures. I'll bet, said Roverton, they think we're some new species of animal native to this world and are trying to classify us. They have the look of investigative scientists, agreed Volmar, and it must be giving them a lot of trouble to place us in their system of biology or zoology. And then you get that idea of trade, right? Then that comes in as well.
That's what reminded me of that scene in A New Hope, right? With C-3PO and R2-D2 and the Jawas and Luke turning up and them trying to sell him all these junkers. And that's kind of what I got from this. It's very similar.
It's interesting to speculate, isn't it? And we've said this before, how much of an influence Smith had on certainly Star Trek and other sci-fi. Because this is early sci-fi, right? This is...
Oh, yeah.
Or that first era of sci-fi.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting because I'm actually watching a modern sci-fi series at the minute. It's called The Orville.
All right.
And it's kind of like a sort of comedic take on it. Magpies a lot of things, so there's a lot of Star Trek in there, a lot of Mass Effect, a bit of Red Dwarf, but I'm really enjoying it so far. But there's an episode in that where the captain and his first officer get lured into, it's like a hologram thing in space. They dock the shuttle and it zaps them away and they end up in a zoo. And that's what it reminds me of. It reminded me of this. Yeah.
And of course, it's not just the humans that are being bartered for here. There's the other thing they captured in the burrows, and there's a variety of other what are described as quaint monsters.
Well, there's a band name.
Oh, the Quaint Monsters. Oh, that's good.
It's a surf. Yeah, you could go. Yeah, sort of death rock surf band. Yeah,
that is very good. I'm writing that one down. Some were undreamable mixtures of serpentine insect and mammalian forms, others were the loathsome enormous annelids, and others still were not alliable with any known genus or combination of genera. Whatever they are, they're all netted up, and ropes come out of the vessel, and basically everything is dragged in and packed away. So yeah, this is like a scientific survey ship, or as we said, collecting species or
specimens.
Whatever for some specimens for something, which again makes them as much the sort of Victorian colonialists as it does Walmart, doesn't it?
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, it's what it reminded me of, like Gerald Durrell, the zoo on what was it, one of the Greek islands.
Yeah, did you have one on Jersey as well?
Yes, yeah.
Yeah, I've been to that one on Jersey many years ago.
Yeah,
the Greek islands. So yeah, which that's another debate, I suppose. But when that sort of thing is done with the right intentions in order to preserve and everything else,
indeed.
But let's be honest, most of that started out as entertainment, doesn't it?
Oh yeah. Looks like we're talking again about these big manor houses over here. How many of them had a menagerie?
Oh yeah. Yeah. You'd have a giraffe or something, and a baboon or something. Yeah, awful.
What I like about this again, it's all Roverton again stealing the show, because he just takes it all in his stride, doesn't he? Because he's watched this obvious transaction, and he just shouts out, "Sold!"
It is so British, isn't it? That character.
Yeah. It is. That's it. He is a chap. He's a proper. He is like a PG Woodhouse character.
Yeah. And actually, I just noticed this is another religious thing, right? Because anything that gives a struggle gets a prod with these dwarves have these dull bluish rods with a circular disc on the end. Obviously, some kind of cattle prod or stun gun.
Yep. And
Roverton says, "Hell, they're going to lay us out too." At this point, they're surrounded by the dwarves in a circle. And this is where we get the next action bit, right? Because Volmar says, "Let's make a break from it." And you get this little hurl themselves at the dwarves, and there's a bit of a struggle goes on. Yeah. But they both get touched with these rods and are paralysed instantly. So again, the action is actually quite short. It's not a big, long, drawn-out fight scene, is it? Or chase.
Well, if you remember, the last time we did a story like this, it was exactly the same. It was like it started going and then it stopped. It started going and then it stopped.
Yeah.
Do you remember when was it an adventure in futurity? Maybe.
I think it was. Yeah, where we got that big build up and then it just went and then they found a cure, kind of thing, wasn't it?
And it kept doing it. It kept like building, stop, building, stop, and But I guess because this is quite a long one, and that was as well, I wonder if Smith was thinking about serialization.
That could well be, because you got your classic cliffhanger chapter ending here of they're both fall into darkness totally unconscious, so yeah.
I do wonder if he was thinking about serialization, because like a good example of that is Herbert West Reanimator, right?
Yes. Yeah, which you can almost read each individual one on its own, can't you?
Yeah.
So that brings us into chapter 3, and we've got another band name coming up. Emerging from the Bourneless Midnight of Oblivion. Midnight of Oblivion. There you go.
Oh, well, there's a goth band. Yeah.
That is good, isn't it?
Yeah.
So our heroes awake, and they're basically in some sort of cage. Looking through the bars, they can see other structures in which all the other creatures are trapped.
Yep.
The cages were in a long room with curving walls and a low arched ceiling. And there's a rich purple light. There's quite a lot of light in this as well. We haven't really mentioned the colours much so far, but Smith does put in his violets and his purples, those very rich colours again.
Yeah.
And they're obviously on board the ship because we've got the hum of the engines. So now the fear is, are they being taken off planet to who knows where? And here's the understatement again. Where are we, Roverton? I don't know exactly, but we're all boxed up and ready for delivery to the zoo, wherever it is. I think we're now in mid-space. Our chances of ever seeing the Alcyone again are none too gaudy under the circumstances. Hell, what a prospect. And Volmar replies, The situation is rather dubious, to say the least. Rather dubious.
I'm going to remember that next time things are looking a bit dicey down the boozer. Situation's looking rather dubious, to say the least. Yeah.
And to be fair to their captors, they do try and give them some food and water, but they've got no clue what this stuff is. And of course, they're wearing their masks. They've got their spacesuits on, so how can they eat through the masks? They can't do that anyway, even granting that the stuff is fit for human consumption. And he makes a not unreasonable assumption that dwarves must think the masks are part of their anatomy.
Yeah, which is interesting because they did exactly the same thing earlier.
Yeah. So it's that nice reversal in a sense, isn't it?
Well, the whole thing is a reversal, right? Because they're going down, looking at things, kicking over plants, doing the explore a bit, and then they get sort of trapped by another race doing exactly the same thing.
Yeah. And Volmar says it's not unreasonable they think this because they found us on this world, the Mercurian world as he describes it.
Mm-hmm.
So why would they think they were anything other than a native species?
Mm.
And again, we get that idea of their captors are probably so conceited as to believe that their own world is the only one capable of producing highly involved and intelligent life forms, which isn't unusual because Earth was exactly the same before space travel. You know, scientists argued that the Earth was the only world in all the universe that was inhabitable by any kind of organic life, which is quite an assumption to make. But I suppose people did back in the day. Maybe, I don't know. I mean, the Earth was the centre of the universe at one time, right?
Absolutely. But this is what, for me, elevates this story above a lot of the other sci-fi stories of the era, because it's got that sort of reflection. It does think about these things, that it's not just like, here, they're aliens, they're bad. There is some kind of meditation on it, why they would act like this. And that's Smith all over, isn't it? It's I'm hard pressed to think of another writer of the era that does things like that.
Yeah, maybe Wells.
Possibly.
It's been a long time since I read War of the Worlds.
A long time. Yeah.
So they've got to eat and drink something, you know. But first of all, they sort of slowly, carefully take off their respiratory gear and they find that it's all right, they can breathe. And then they try some of the food, or at least Roverton does.
It's Roverton, isn't it? I'm hungry. So give it here.
he takes one for the team, he gives it and promptly, well, not that promptly, but I don't believe I feel so very well. And he's down. And Volmar's beginning to feel a little bit sick himself, but he didn't actually eat any food, but he did have some of the water. But Roverton's in a bit of trouble here, it seems, isn't he?
I like this here because it proves that Volmar isn't yet a reformed character, because you get Roverton saying, "What do you say we try it?" referring to the food, and Volmar replies, "Go ahead. If you survive, I'll experiment myself. Just be careful." There you go, Captain Douchebag living up to his name.
Yeah. Well, and that continues. He continues in that vein, right? Because Roverton is writhing convulsively, moaning and out of his head for a couple of hours, this says. And Volmar sits beside him, watching him, totally unable, for lack of medicinal remedies, to do anything. So he just sits there and watches. He don't even offer him any comfort or something, or, you know.
I'm dubious.
Right,
I'm dubious of that stuff. That's what Volmar says. Oh dear.
And this brings the attention of their captors back, and it spurs another debate amongst these creatures. So a panel gets opened in the cage, and the two get prodded with the sleepy sticks again. They're put out again.
They whip their rods out again, don't they? Oh.
So we've got another chapter ending in merciful oblivion. I have to say, that's a phrase I sometimes use myself, and you always...
Yes.
You know, this is the problem with action, right? And it happens in films and it happens in sword and sorcery. The chapter always ends with someone getting knocked out, right? It's such an easy thing to do, to get from one scene to the next.
It's not just literature either. It's TV. It's everything. You know, it's like how many cliffhangers? I'd love to actually go and look through that. How many 60s cliffhangers of Doctor Who and Star Trek end with like the Doctor or Kirk getting knocked out?
And that was the whole basis for the Vulcan nerve pinch, right?
Oh yeah,
Because it was like Spock's going to cut, like, so Kirk does his space foo, his roll
space karate,
the judo chop, and it was like they said, well, Spock, you knock someone out, and I think Nimoy said, wouldn't Spock do something a little more subtle, and that's where they came up with the nerve pinch. Great idea.
Great it idea. Is, yeah. The Vulcan submission holds. Yeah, I like it. I'd like to see Spock whipping out a chin lock or a reverse naked choke or something,
But honestly, if you could have one superpower, that would be on the top 5 list, wouldn't it? The Vulcan nerve pinch.
Oh, wouldn't it just? Yeah.
So, chapter 4. They awake again, and they're even more baffled because they're no longer on the spaceship. They're in a room. Spacious, walled and roofed and floored with alabaster-like stone of great lustre and beauty. So now we presume we're on the aliens' home planet. I thought the descriptions here were really nice. The city and the furniture and all the little bits and pieces. Again, Smith, can really go to town on this stuff.
Yeah, that's what I was about to say. Was I love this description here, that they were lying on a broad couch covered with a flossy mottled material of red and saffron, and inclined at an angle of perhaps 15 degrees. The room was furnished with several small tables supported on frail, spidery legs, and littered with outlandish implements of quaintly shaped vials, such as the surgeons or chemists of an unknown world might employ. Again, it's like a vision of the future of 60s sci-fi, isn't it? It's just like,
yes. Yeah,
it's almost like the makers of 60s sci-fi went back through these old editions of Weird Tales and Wonder Stories and went, that's the set right there.
It is, because it's quite psychedelic in a way, isn't it? I mean, with the colours, we've got the violet sky and
saffrons
all that stuff,
and reds and
these like gossamer bridges and everything else. So yeah, it's almost fairy tale, isn't it?
Yeah, it's a little bit Xanadu, isn't it? It's
I think that the tables with spidery legs, that
I like that.
You're waiting for them to start walking across the room, aren't you? That's quite creepy again. And they sort of work out that since the aliens worked out that they were wearing masks, if they're wearing masks, they're obviously intelligent. So you get the impression they've been taken to this place, not just put in the zoo with the sort of big spider thing, because that's just an animal, but they're worthy of further investigation or research, I suppose.
Yeah, they've been quite nice, these captors, because they've sort of gone through their tanks and replicated the oxygen and synthesized some food that they think won't make them ill. So they are, they're doing their best. But part of me can't help wondering how much they paid for them, and whether it's because through monetary reasons.
These are an investment,
exactly.
We paid 50 pasars for them,
Yeah, exactly.
You're not going to just stick them in a crate and whatever.
Yeah.
And we get what seem to be more authoritative aliens turn up now. They've got more delicate antennae and proboscides than the ones they'd seen on the space vessel. And their coloration partook of deep red and orange and Tyrian tones. And they're trying to communicate with Volmar and Roverton now. And they get sort of shown around the place a little bit. These aliens lead them out onto a balcony. We get our first view of this alien city, and they're really high up, right? That's the first thing.
Yeah.
All around and above there soared other buildings of the same white material and the same bizarre structure as the one on whose balcony the Earthmen were standing. These edifices were of colossal extent, and many of them culminated in airy spires and pinnacles of a fairy delicacy, thronging the bright purple heavens like a host of shining obelisks. At frequently recurring intervals, the buildings were connected by bridges of gossamer thinness and fragility, which formed a gleaming web work in the air. So again, it's that sort of mix of fairy and almost insectoid or arachnid webs and spires. Very sort of delicate in a way.
Yeah. I don't know why. For some reason, the description reminds me of Flash Gordon.
All right.
I don't know why. There's a scene in that with the Brian Blessed, the winged chap, and all that. It reminds me of that for some reason. I'm not sure why.
Well, you could almost see this as a Flash Gordon story, couldn't you, to be honest?
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
This could be Flash Gordon and whoever... Professor
Zark.
I can only remember the characters from Flesh Gordon, so I better not say.
Flesh Gordon. Oh, Flesh Gordon. What a movie.
I think Mr. Smith would have approved of the Penosaurus, that's all I'm saying.
Indeed. There appears to be oxygen on this planet. Yeah.
There's something here that made me laugh as well, I just noticed. So they get taken out and across one of these bridges. They're being taken somewhere else. The Earthmen followed their guide, who was tripping lightly and unconcernedly before them. That has a different implication, doesn't it, from the 60s
It does.
onwards?
It does, doesn't it, just?
Wow, look at the Gossamer Bridges, man.
I wouldn't say tripping lightly, though, if you're seeing Gossamer Bridges in the sky.
That's a heavy duty trip, isn't it?
That's a good old loaded ink blotter right there. Timothy Leary's finest medicine.
So they're taken to a laboratory, basically, and there's cages in there contain these various creatures from different places. Most of them rendered unconscious, and dwarves wearing atmospheric masks enter the cages, and by means of little suction pumps attached to the crystalline vials were extracting various amounts of the life fluids, or perhaps of certain special glandular secretions from the moveless monsters. So they've got these creatures. Now they're taking samples of glands or blood or whatever other fluids, but for what reason we don't know.
Yeah. Brings to mind those the labs where they, test all this kind of stuff, or the Umbrella Corporation,
Oh, yeah. And they get put in this sort of weird X-ray machine, I suppose it is, isn't it?
Yeah, I liked this because it was different, wasn't it? It's kind of like a light disc that just sort of comes down and makes them feel incredibly cold, but it shows up all their organs and stuff in 3D, not just like your shadow image that you get from an X-ray.
Yeah, that's quite a neat device, that, and quite original for its time, I would imagine.
Oh, and X-rays weren't that old at that point, were they?
No. It doesn't make them feel very good, though.
No.
No, they're reeling with sickness that persisted and grew upon them, and they're led through another set of halls and chambers into a small room whose door was then closed with a gong-like clang. The room was occupied by 4 dwarves who wore atmospheric masks and was filled with mysterious implements that were sinister as those of a torture chamber. So we're getting into almost that. What would it be called? Like surgery horror, like body horror kind of stuff?
Yeah. It's sort of body horror. Yeah, torture porn.
Yeah. You're going to be surgically altered in some way, and you have absolutely no power to resist it.
Well, again, that was a very 1960s thing. There was that whole scare of spare part surgery, which is why the things like the Cybermen were created. So again, it's very sort of forward thinking. But my brain, being the gutter that it is, was thinking, time for the probing, lads.
Yes, please warm it up first.
Yeah.
I suppose the other thing it puts me in mind of, as far as that goes, is the series UFO.
UFO, yeah.
Where the aliens were coming to Earth possibly to harvest human organs. It's never quite fully explained, but yeah.
That was a good series. I'd like to watch that again, actually.
But all that happens, is they have blood samples taken. Quite a lot, it seems, because they're on the point of virtual collapse. And there's talk of filled bottles. So it seems like a fair amount. And it gets replaced with a light green fluid in a transparent hypodermic. What does that remind you of?
It's old Mr. West again, isn't it? Yeah.
And that sort of bucks them up. So, don't know what's in that fluid, but it certainly revives them.
Again, you get a classic Roverton thing. Classic Roverton response. Well, remarked Roverton, that dope is what you might call an all-round panacea. I don't feel as if there ever had been or ever could be anything the matter with me. The stuff seems to take the place of food, drink, and medicine. It's a pretty fair tonic, agreed Volmar, but watch out for the possible hangover.
Hangover? Well, it's just been injected with G&T.
Yeah. I've often wondered about hooking myself up to an IV drip.
Well, it saves washing up glasses, doesn't it? And stuff
Yeah, exactly.
Like that. Just
Yeah.
straight in.
Yeah. No muss, no fuss.
Instant oblivion. So, chapter 5, and this is quite disturbing now because the blood that has been taken from them is injected into. Well, I don't think they have any choice about it. You get. So these are the same creatures, but they appear to be cruder and more primitive tribe of the same race with duller colouring. Seated on spidery-looking stools, we've got that image again. And a group of these are sitting around armed with the anaesthetic rod. So you get the impression these are the workers, right? These are
the drudges, aren't they?
The guards and the whatever.
Yeah.
But there's two of them just standing there, and they get injected with the human blood. And Roverton says, trying it on the dogs, eh? Which is a bit of a cold remark, I think. And it certainly doesn't go well because they start to twist and shriek in terrible pain, swelling visibly as if from the effects of some deadly poison. The dull-hued integument of their bodies blackening moment by moment. The injected venom of 100 cobras could not have produced a more immediate or more appalling result. And they basically die. So that's the first experiment. I presume that's an experiment gone wrong because what are they looking for? Are they looking for a cure for something? We don't really know, do we?
No.
Is it that idea of they've got some disease hitting their planet so they need some sort of cure or what?
Yeah, it's interesting because, again, that's a common trope in sci-fi where you get these alien species, these races, that will take elements of other races to enhance themselves, by various means. So I'm getting that from that they're maybe taking it to try and beef themselves up. Maybe they're just trying to create super soldiers. I don't know.
Yeah, it could be. The purposes could be, in a sense, they could be. You hesitate to use the words "good," but it could be for the good of their people, or it could be, like you say, they want to create some sort of creature that can just go and conquer other places or something. So this is where we get our next burst of action, because Valmar and Roverton are feeling increasingly edgy, and one of these guys with the anaesthetic rods makes a bit of a sort of sudden move towards them or something, and that sort of spurs them to spring into action. And we get a sort of a bit of a punch up here, don't we? We get someone hit with a table and all that kind of stuff.
Yes, it's actually Roverton, which I thought was unusual. Swinging the table aloft, Roverton hurled it in the face of his attacker. The creature was beaten down, releasing the lambent-headed wand as he fell, and it shot forward and dropped at Roverton's feet. In a flash, Roverton picked it up, and he and Volmar sprang for the door.
Yes, yeah, and they start using these things, right? They start hitting these things with the rod, and they're killing them, basically, it seems.
Yeah.
Yeah, and now we get this sort of chase scene, which, again, is quite cinematic, isn't it? I suppose it's typical of this kind of story.
It is.
And we're going to get another cheap laugh here because...
yeah, I know exactly what you're going to say.
I'm so transparent.
Go for it.
They were in a long corridor, wholly deserted for the nonce, which led on one hand to the huge room of monster cages. Yes, well, there we go. That's just us.
Yeah, no, in British parlance, saying that they were in a long corridor, wholly deserted for the nonce, is enough to give anyone the chills.
And we get this sort of fast cut scenes, you can imagine, because they're going past, they're looking in different rooms.
Mm-hmm.
They encounter a sleepy looking monster like a sort of wingless dragon, which was probably a pet, and they sort of jump over it and carry on. They eventually see the glaring mauve of daylight, and they emerge on another narrow balcony, and you've got this ever-growing swarm of pursuers behind them. So basically they have a choice. They're way up in the air, and again the height is emphasised, and it's either get captured or run across this thin, narrow gossamer bridge.
Yeah.
This is the rope bridge right across the chasm, isn't it?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. Well, I always think Cloud City and Star Wars as well.
Oh yeah.
It's a lot like those. Again, it's that classic adventure trope, isn't it? It's Yeah, there'd be if it was Indiana Jones, there'd be some bastard there with a machete cutting the end as they're halfway across.
Yes, and it is exactly that scene. The crowd bursts out on the balcony behind them. They have to go across the bridge. "Here goes," cried Roverton, panting as he led the way along the slender span. It was a mad race. The men dare not slacken their speed, for their pursuers, two abreast, were crowding the bridge behind them like ants. And of course, as in all good chase scenes like this, you get some appear at the other end of the bridge as well. So things are looking desperate.
Mm-hmm.
But Roverton steps up again here, doesn't he?
He does, yeah.
Holding his own weapon like a lance, Roverton faced these beings without hesitation. It was a perilous combat, for two of them were side by side. He struck and parried with lightning agility, and the two, with yawning holes in their thoraxes from the impact of the fearsome igneous cone, went down in swift succession and hurtled into the half-mile chasm beneath.
I thought that was uncharacteristically graphic there, actually, the yawning holes in their thoraxes. I like it. It's almost Robert E. Howard-esque, isn't it?
Yeah, though to be fair with Smith, he doesn't really stint from the gore.
No, he doesn't.
It's not quite in Howard's sort of league when it comes to descriptions.
Arcing arterial splatters that you get in.
Yeah. And gushing whatevers, yeah.
Block's the other one for that, isn't he?
Yes.
Robert Block's another one for that.
But when you think in Lovecraft, I can't think that you really see any gore at all, do you?
Mm.
It's all sort of implied.
Yeah, I think there's a few bits and pieces in Reanimator, but I think apart from that, it is mostly implied, isn't it?
Yeah, you get a bit of liquescent horror, don't you? Maybe now and again.
Yeah.
Sort of thing.
Yeah.
But this is a full-on fight scene. Now, to be fair, Volmar does play his part here because Roverton dodges and teeters on the edge of the bridge, and Volmar grabs him to pull him back. So Volmar does save him, I guess, there. But then he probably only saves him because he was doing so well. So they manage to get across the bridge and into the tower opposite, and they make quite a smart decision here, I suppose. They think their pursuers will expect them to go down, so they decide to go up instead.
Yeah. And again, you get another classic Roverton moment here. Haven't these people any elevator systems?
And the irony is, it turns out they have, right?
Indeed.
We find out in a minute. They've just not recognised it. At least I thought it was weird, this sort of place. It sounded a bit like a cross between an art gallery and a sort of observatory. There's a lot of astronomical stuff floating around.
I think that's a good thing, is the fact that it's unusual to us. You know, alien, isn't it? Make it alien.
Yeah.
I mean, that's why. Yeah.
Why would you know what it's all about?
Well, that's why Shadow Out of Time was great, because when they go down into under the Great Sandy Desert into that city, Narcotis or whatever it's called, and there's all these rooms with all this weird stuff in it, and they haven't got a clue what it is. So, you know.
Yeah. Yeah. And this is another, I suppose, trope in action, is it, where they go up and you end up fighting at the top of the tower on the battlements or that kind of thing. It has that feel about it, a bit sort of Errol Flynnish. I guess, again, to be fair to Smith at the time, you wouldn't have really seen this much in films, would you, at that time?
No. There was a few horror, like early horror stuff, but yeah,
it's another sort of 10 years before you get into your Errol Flynns and all that sort of thing, isn't it? But
yeah,
I don't know, silent action movies. There's another bit of listener homework.
Yeah, your silent westerns, that'd probably be the nearest. You know, lots of sped up footage of people falling off stagecoaches, that kind of thing. But
oh yeah, that's true. So they find themselves at the top of the tower in a curious open cupola whose lofty dome was filled with large perforations. The place was lined with instruments that were doubtless astronomical, and in the centre of the alabastrine floor the men perceived a sable disc, perhaps 4 feet in diameter. So they step to the verge of the turret here and look out, and they're even higher up now. They could see the whole extent of the mighty city, which reached for many miles in every direction, lying below them at a depth which turned the people in its streets to microscopic motes. This is a nice phrase as well, I thought. Around the city was a landscape of ineffable bizarrerie, with wide canals of blood-red water that intersected each other to form terraced aisles, and then wound away through fields and forests of a vegetation whose colouring was more violent than that of futuristic paintings.
And again, Roverton. Golly! was Roverton's ejaculation. The outlook is almost worth the climb, but I'd rather be seeing it from the Alcyone.
Oh yeah, and the other thought I thought there was red canals. That's Mars, right? That's got to be the Mars thing.
Yeah.
Basically, then we get this fight at the top of the staircase. So the two of them at the top of the stairs, all the aliens are trying to come up, and they're basically hurling stuff down on them and keeping there. Now, this has a historic precedent in terms of battles and combat. We have to go back to the 1980s and a time where a group of about 20 or 30 West Ham fans had a fight on a cross-channel ferry with a horde. I think they were Man United. There was like 300 Man United fans sort of thing. And the West Ham, probably ICF, barricaded themselves at the top of stairs and were throwing fire extinguishers and everything down on the Manx. This is real North versus South stuff, right?
Oh, proper, yeah.
I mean, that made the daily press and everything. The ferry was stopped. I think the army were called out, the navy were called out. You know,
I remember reading about that in the newspaper, yeah.
So Smith is prescient in so many ways.
I've forgotten all about that. No, it was bonkers, wasn't it? The some of the scuffles you got around that time, man.
Yeah, I think they were pulling the fire hoses off the wall. I think they even turned a fire hose on at one point. Right, proper good old-fashioned punch-up from the sounds of it.
God almighty.
Yeah, so they did put me in mind of that. And, you know, they're really doing a number on these dwarves, aren't they? The dwarves are clearing away the dead and wounded, and they come on again.
It's a siege at this point, isn't it?
Yeah, yeah. And then I get a noise behind them, right? And there's some sort of aircraft coming in to land on the turret.
Yeah, where my brain instantly thinks, crikey, it's the Rozzers. You know?
Flashing blue light.
Like, yeah. Whoop, whoop.
And here's Roverton again. Roverton called Volmar's attention to the new danger. If you can hold the stairs, Captain, I'll tend to these customers. And sprang to meet the invaders. He's really earning his stripes, isn't he, in this story?
He is, yeah. The thing is, though, because of the way he's characterised, the way he speaks and all the rest of it, I see him in Queensberry Rules, you know, going down there, put up your jukes.
Rolled his sleeves up. Like, yeah.
Rolled his sleeve, yeah. See him with his rolled up sleeves, you know.
But, you know, numbers tell in the end. Volmar falls. Roverton's in trouble. He steps back and suddenly he steps onto this disc and suddenly he begins to fall with dizzy velocity in a long dark shaft. So another cliffhanger chapter ending.
Yeah, I think he must have thought it may get serialised.
Yeah, yeah. So he has found the elevator, as we said before, quite by accident. So he thinks Volmar's dead at this stage because he saw him getting overwhelmed up top.
Yeah.
And he rides this thing all the way down into the vaults, isn't it? It's I suppose he doesn't know, he has no control over it, he doesn't know where the buttons are or anything like that. But luckily it just naturally stops right at the bottom, which I suppose it would. You don't design an elevator that's going to smash into the ground.
No, many of them have throughout history, but I don't think they were designed like that.
Yes. Yeah, isn't it all right if you jump up just before you hit?
Oh, that was the thing as a kid, wasn't it? You try and time it when you're a kid, try and jump, yeah.
And now, I suppose it sounds like we're in the engine room, aren't we, of the city? This is the underworld. We've got furnaces and pipes and engines.
Huge ramifying pipes went up and vanished in the darkness of a funnel-like dome, in the wildly flickering patches of light and monstrous masses of shadow. Roverton saw dim, titanic figures, but did not realise at first that they were living beings. They were 10 or 12 feet in height and were strange and uncouth as the mechanisms which they tended. So yeah, this is another class again. These are the real workers, you know.
Yeah.
These are your millers, your coal miners kind of chaps, you know.
Yeah. Your stokers and all that kind of stuff, aren't they? Yeah. So we have that. It's interesting. We still have that structure, that almost class system, isn't it?
It is, yeah. It's a class system, yeah.
And each class has different physical characteristics, which was a Victorian idea, wasn't it? Anyway, because obviously your working class are all,
yes,
you know, got odd-shaped heads and all that kind of thing.
Yeah.
Quite ironic, given the effects of inbreeding amongst the upper classes. But
yeah. That sort of carried over into things like Tolkien, right? With the orcs and all that. And yeah,
that's a good point. Yeah. And your proper people, wasn't it? Your proper proper breeding.
Proper breeding, yeah.
We're in charge. And we get another chase scene here because Robertson's trying to escape when one of the giants sees him and starts in pursuit. The thing was a biological nightmare with one swollen, blazing, sulphur yellow eye where the mouth would be in a human face, and all the rest a mass of writhing, viperish tentacles around a central slit. So again, a nice, slightly Lovecraftian feeling creature. Reminded me a bit of like the Dreamland stuff. Were they the Gugs?
Yeah, Gugs. Yeah.
Yeah, one of those sort of races, you know.
Yeah. I'm liking the amount of tentacle action in this one, actually. There is quite a lot of tentacle action in this.
There is. Yeah, more than usual, really.
Yeah.
He must have been reading more Lovecraft at this time.
Yeah.
So we get this chase through the, I suppose, the vaults or the engine room, and that gradually becomes cruder and cruder until he finds himself in a natural cavern. And I suppose that would be the way of things, right? These are built from the natural caverns and expanded. And of course, the natural caverns are home to natural things.
Yep.
And he finds himself being grabbed by whitish tendrils hanging like a curtain from the cavern roof, and he had blundered into them without seeing. What they were he could not imagine. His brain groped for analogies, for similes that he could not recall. And they basically entwine him, and for the third time, I think, at the end of the chapter, we get another fall into unconsciousness.
Only this time it's a clueless labyrinth of dark infinity, which I thought was an awesome line. I love that.
That's nice. That's much better than Merciful Oblivion, isn't it? That's really nice.
Yeah. Clueless labyrinth of dark infinity.
So the final chapter, chapter 7. Roverton has a vague impression of being carried by one of these creatures. I mean, I suppose you can imagine this is where that sanity thing comes in, isn't it? It's all this happening in a sort of human environment would be bad enough, but the fact that he's coming up against these creatures, like I says, he can't even think of, he can't even imagine what they are. That's really got to twist your melon, isn't it?
Oh yeah, absolutely. Yeah. But that's again, it's back to that letter to Derleth, isn't it? That's exactly what you were saying in that.
So yeah, you've got your natural thing. I mean, he even says about, oh, Volmar's dead. That's a bit sad. But the overriding emotion is just like, what the fuck is going on?
What the hell's going on? Where am I? What's going on? Blah. Yeah. Basically, poor chap's failing his sand roll as we speak.
Yeah. But Volmar is not dead. He's alive.
Hooray, I think.
Yeah, they're both sort of bound. They seem to be hanging up by. It sounds like the old hang the prisoner by his wrists kind of jobs, isn't it? Off the dungeon wall. Yeah. And he's actually not sure at first if Volmar is dead or alive because his eyes are closed and his skin is one as still as marble. But Volmar comes to, and they seem to be at the centre of a wide street or square with the people of the city standing about them in a solemn, silent crowd. And they're tied to something that appeared to be a sort of platform. Now, this put me a bit in mind of the last story with the Testament of Athameus. This sounds like an execution scene now.
It does, yeah. And now I've got Falco stuck in my head again.
Athameus. And, well, it is an execution, basically, because what this disc is, it's one of these elevator discs. Except this one is going all the way up into space. The dead utter silence was broken by a loud click, followed by a whirring sound, as of some metal wheel or spring. The world beneath Roverton seemed to quiver and surge. The staring faces disappeared from his vision, and he saw that the thing to which Volmar and himself had been bound was rising rapidly in air among the fantastic bridges and structures of the White City. They're on their way up, and Volmar comes around and asks, "Where are we?" And here's Volmar again, right? "Are you really alive?" cried Roverton. "Apparently we're both alive, incredible as the fact may be, but that isn't answering my question as to where we are." It's a bit snippy, isn't it?
Yeah, I know, yeah.
As far as I can tell, we are on some sort of anti-gravitational raft and are headed for outer space. That's not news you want to wake up to, is it?
It's not, is it? It's one of those, oh, sod this, I'm going back to sleep. Yeah.
And this is where I think the ending is a bit, well...
It's a bit abrupt, isn't it? That's what I thought.
It's a bit abrupt, and it's a little bit daft, I think, as well. So they're just going up and up and up, and obviously the higher you go, the colder it gets, the less oxygen there is, etc., etc. Yes, well, I suppose it's the end. Well, goodbye, Captain. Goodbye, Roverton. You can imagine they shake hands, can't you?
Oh, yeah.
Perhaps have a little hug and a peck on the cheek secretly.
Yeah, maybe. Yeah.
And I guess have they got their spacesuits on still? I suppose there is that, but I don't think they've got their masks on, have they? They start freezing to death, basically.
Yeah. Just imagine them trying to keep their upper lip stiff, you know.
And things are looking, well, extremely perilous as they go higher and higher. They must be in the upper reaches of the atmosphere, at least into... Is it inner space, do they call that? Is there an inner space and outer space?
Yeah.
And who should turn up but the Alcyone? Da, 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 da.
It's the Alcyone. Yeah. It's the way it's written as well. It's like they open their eyes. A long, shining bulk was poised above them in the heavens. It was the Alcyone.
Yeah, and they somehow managed to open a porthole or something and drag them both in off of this disc. Oh, well, there's another little snigger, because then incredibly someone had emerged from the manhole. Manhole.
Yeah.
Cuts their bonds with a knife. Strong arms lifted them and carried them through the airlock into the warm interior of the Alcyone.
Right, there's half an hour later, after a course of vigorous massage to ward off possible frostbite and a good meal to fortify their starved and exhausted systems, they lay in their bunks and exchange narratives with Jasper and the crew. It's all very abrupt, isn't it? It's sort of like certain death, hurtling towards space. This is a nice massage and get bed led, you know.
Yeah. Then we'll have a chat. Let's have a bit of a chat. Yeah, it's very kind of prim and proper, isn't it, in a lot of ways?
It is, yeah.
And not even in a military sense, is it? Because
no.
When you think of Star Trek, I mean, he's a captain, so that implies a military rank, but they don't talk like military people.
Mm.
I mean, even in Star Trek, it's warp factor 5, man the torpedoes, all that kind of stuff, red alert.
Yeah.
There's none of that in this, is there? They're more like you say, chaps.
Yeah, chaps in space. Yeah. But I mean, even like in the merchant navy, they still use nautical terminology and things like that.
Yeah.
Whereas this is two chaps in a drawing room kind of conversations, isn't it?
Yeah. So although it's sort of prim and proper, there's nothing, what would you call, like a sort of official about it as such, is there? It's odd.
No. Yeah, it's all very informal.
So that's basically it. Jasper explains how they'd guessed that Roverton and Volmar had got lost, so they took off and flew around a bit, saw the alien vessel take off, so basically followed it to the home planet, and have been hovering around, waiting for something to happen.
You see, I think it'd be interesting if Smith went back and did a story at the same time, but from the other's perspective, because it'd be hilarious, wouldn't it? Jasper and a couple of the other guys going, should we go down there? Like, no, I don't like the look of it. I really don't. You know, some of them weird things with tentacles on their face. Well, fuck that. Let's have another drink first.
Jasper, I think there's something taking off. Oh, let's have a look at that. Oh, it's them. Oh, that's handy. We were just about to leave. And the last line goes to Roverton and Volmar, or the last lines. Of all the lucky breaks, said Roverton when the tale was finished. With that kind of luck, added Volmar, I don't think that anything can keep us from navigating one or two more solar systems, at least. And that's where you get your police squad ending, right, isn't it, where they laugh and freeze.
Yeah. Cue the credits. Yeah.
So, what do we think?
You see, I was really enjoying it until the ending. I think the ending kind of... You can see that, again, it's like a lot of these stories when we've covered them, you can tell Smith's heart really isn't fully into it.
Oh, yeah.
You know, especially after basically he's been given a brief by this Lasser chap. You know, we want this, we want action, we want that, da-da-da-da. You can, it's almost like you can feel him sort of reining himself in to a degree when he's going into his descriptions, and because that's where the story shines, right? I mean, them early scenes I thought were tremendous, like the bit in the burrow with this not only the monsters trying to hunt them, there's also the thing lurking behind them, the big hairy spidery thing, right? I thought that was brilliant. But then that ending is just kind of like,
Yeah, it's not a particularly plausible ending, and it's very much, oh, it was all a dream, kind of. Just that's it, isn't it?
I think it'd been better if they'd have frozen to death, personally.
Well, that'd be more your Weird Tale ending, wouldn't it? They just slowly ascend, and
Or just leave it there. Just leave it with them ascending,
yeah.
and leave it ambiguous. I think that would have been.
Yeah.
So maybe that was part of the. This why it's a shame that that letter isn't still in existence, because I'd love to know what was in it. Because maybe having a happy ending or something like that was in it, because it just feels completely bolted on.
Well, because it's a series, right, as well. So who knows were any more of these planned? But you can't kill off Volmar. Though personally, I'd rather see Volmar nudged off the edge of that platform, and Roverton says, "Oh, Volmar didn't make it. I'm the captain now."
Roverton and Jasper, man, that should have been the. That's how they should have done it, right? Jasper, because Jasper's the lazy bugger, right? He's the.
They basically came out of the spaceship, right, wandered around for a bit, and thought, let's go out, let's have a cup of tea, like you said, and then, oh, what's that taking off over there? Oh, that's what happened.
Yeah, put the kettle on, Bob.
Yeah, I mean, it's an interesting notion they can follow the alien ship to its own planet as well. How long was that journey? If they're going faster than the speed of light, how do you follow something? They must have a comparable technology to follow it. Would the alien ship not notice them? Have they got a cloaking device? It starts to raise a lot of practical questions, which I know you're not really supposed to get into in this kind of story, but
no.
Again,
it's hard not to when it's sci-fi. I don't know why.
Yeah.
Above other genres, for some reason, sci-fi, you always get people picking everything apart.
Yeah.
And I don't know why it's peculiar to science fiction. I'd love to know why, but
well, I think it's because it's about tech, and when it's something like we jump through a portal. I've used that in my stories, I'm sure you have. Right, they go through a portal, they're in another place, someone else jumps in behind them to follow them, and they're in wherever they are, Dreamlands or whatever it is. You don't have to explain anything. It's a portal. That's what portals do.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
If it's a spaceship, well, how does it travel between star systems? Because that's going to take 70 years to get from there to there.
How much fuel are you going to need?
Yeah.
What's the what's the inertia ratio? All this kind of other, this is what like when I've been at conventions and you get the guys that are into hard sci-fi, and they have the panels and they're discussing like engine specs and things like this in a very animated and serious manner. And it's just completely over my head. I'm just like, I don't know, just get in and press the button and you go there, man.
Well, that's it. I mean, it's that old thing again, like if you're doing a modern day setting, you don't describe how a car works, right? Someone drives to Liverpool, they get the train to Glasgow. There's no discussion that it's a steam train and it runs like this and that. Because we understand that. And even if you set things in the future, I've done like a military sci-fi, 2 books, maybe a third next year. It's obviously a machine gun, but it's a futuristic machine gun. That's all you need to know.
Yeah, that's all you need to know.
It fires flechettes or something, or you don't need to know how it works. It's a machine gun in the future. The same as I don't know how a Gatling gun works from 150 years ago, but everyone understands what a Gatling gun is.
That's a good point. It's funny you mentioned it about the car, because I'm reading E.F. Benson collection again at the minute. Just I like to read classics at this time of year, and I read The Dust Cloud yesterday, which is a story, and it's about like a road haunting a car, but because of the time it was written, the cars were quite new. So there's a lot of discussion about how cars work and things like that, and comparing it to a hungry beast and everything, which I thought was really cool.
Oh, that's
but I'm like, well, you'd never get that now because everybody knows what a car is like and blah blah blah. And so so I just thought it was really interesting.
So there we go. Is that the last we see of Captain Volmar? I'm not sure if there's another. I know there was another story he started writing.
Well, he started writing it at the time he was writing this. He started writing that, and then he got that brief, and shelved it.
Right. So I'm not sure if there's a return or not. I've not through our
Not sure.
not looked through our next volumes, because we were just saying before we came on that we're almost at the end of season 2, and that's really crept up upon us.
Indeed.
So the next time we're going to be looking at the letter from Mohan Loss, and then we're going to be finishing the season with the Hunters from Beyond. And we'll probably do a summary, and certainly we'll get another bonus episode or 2 in before we wrap the season up. I think we were talking about looking at the poetry, weren't we?
Yes, yeah. I think it'd be nice to look at Emperor of Dreams as well at some point.
Oh, yes, of course.
Just because I want another excuse to watch it.
Yeah, perhaps we'll round the season off with a look at Emperor of Dreams.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to Hunters from Beyond, because that's another one that's always been one of my favourites. So,
that's Mythos Tower, isn't it?
Yes, yeah, it's one of its sort of more present day. It's what Robert M. Price calls part of the Clark Ashton Smithos, which just makes me groan every time I read it.
Yeah, that is a bit, it's kind of good but bad, isn't it?
Yeah, it's a dad pun, isn't it? It's yeah.
All right, so dear listener, please do let us know what you think, and we've posed a few questions there as well. So, any help? I think our pronunciations are getting a bit better.
Yeah,
that's arguable, but our knowledge of physics and science is sadly as minuscule as ever. So,
indeed.
Before we go, we just want to say a quick thank you to our patrons, of course. Thank you very much for your support. And our patrons include Sanjay Matthew, Ulrich DeVetta, Mark Jenkins, David Riley, A.T. Johnston, Gary Pennington, Brett Kramer, Aaron Vleck, Steve Meyer, Wingate Stites, Russell Journey, Justin Woodman, Lee Clark Zumper, Rick Seam, and of course, as we mentioned before, Chris Carr. Now, Patreon are in the process, or have just changed their membership system, so we're going to be having a look at that over the next couple of weeks and probably overhauling our Patreon system. It looks like we'll also have the options to sell things direct on our Patreon page as well. We've been trying to set up a Redbubble store for a while now, but we're having a lot of issues with that, so it might be we just move to selling some things direct on Patreon, and then maybe some things like t-shirts and everything else I'll just put up on my own site. Of course, as a patron you'll get discount on those items. You'll also get a quarterly copy of Innsmouth News, and the Halloween edition is in production as we speak. That should be out next week. And as far as the Innsmouth Literary Festival goes, I think we've already put up 2 of the panels to patrons. They're on video, or you can listen to them on MP3, and we'll be putting up the Ramsey Campbell interview very soon if it isn't up already. So those are some of the benefits you get from being a patron, and of course you get the bonus episodes for Strange Shadows and the Innsmouth Book Club as well.
Yeah, and just before we go, I'd just like to mention the shout out to Appendix N, to Jeff and Hoy, because we're both appearing on there imminently. I'm in an episode looking at Jonathan Strange and Mr. Norrell. And Rob, what were you on there looking at?
Yeah, I'm on there covering a novel by Gustave Flaubert called Salambo, which was quite a surprise to me, because it's almost like a sword and sorcery novel set in historic times, the First Punic War. Quite an interesting book. So yeah, it was a good chat, and Appendix N is a great podcast. Do give it a listen if you haven't already. So thanks again for listening, folks. With that, it's goodbye from me, Rob Poynton.
And it's goodbye from me, Tim Mendes.